My experience is that I started out in the BIA school, a dormitory out in Denahotso, Arizona. And during my time when I first started school, we were not allowed to have any connection with our culture. We were punished for speaking Navajo. We were giving very, very strict ideas about what our culture is and that it's something that should not be brought into the classroom, that we needed to assimilate and that we needed to do it as quickly as possible. And they did this quite well, actually. They forbid us to speak Navajo, and they punished us if caught, and had a very, very military-style setting for our early education. So it was quite an experience. I went from that into the placement program, the LDS placement program, and spent 10 years on that down in Arizona, and lived with 3 different families. And actually, when I went into the placement program, didn't know how to speak English, and learned how to speak English at the age of 8, and learned, how to do the different things that they did. I remember my first report cards were all Fs, and I remember my very first C, and I ran home to share the news with my mother and everything. So through school, I loved school. It was a whole new world to me, and it was wonderful learning about a lot of the things. But there were a lot of things that I did not like what they taught about my people.
Well, I think when my family came up here, my dad, he had come up here, I think, at least 1 year, maybe 2. He had been at the boarding school at Brigham City, and he'd always remembered the mountains. And so he had also gone to the boarding school in Phoenix, and he just remembers it being hot, and he didn't like that. So he figured he'd like to come back up here and to raise a family. So we did come. But I always get the impression that, he wanted to give us opportunities, whether there's, an education, learning experiences. And so, that's what he did. And I think having my parents having gone through boarding school, there were things like not speaking your language. Parenting probably wasn't the way traditionally that maybe he could have received. And I think he got parts of that. But I think in the efforts to try to take on or learn the, quote, American way, I think it was maybe perceived that was probably better. However, now, as I've gone through my journey of having to backtrack, find out the historical pieces of not only my Navajo history, but even just American Indian history in general, I see that we do have those values of endurance, of fortitude, and they're there. And I just think I assumed that because I grew up here that what I experienced and what I saw was the only way, and it's not. And so it can enhance what I have. I do acknowledge that it can enhance that, but I already had something. I always tell the story when I would go through school. I lived in a small community 30 miles south from here, and I was one of a few Native American. Well, I think one of the few, very few. So most of my friends were non-Native. But I would go to their houses, and I would always look at their pictures, their ancestral pictures. And these were old. And I'd always look at their face, their eyes, their mouth, what they were wearing. And I'd always kind of wonder, what were they thinking when these pictures were taken? And about 5-10 years ago, an aunt of mine shared with us at a reunion some pictures that were back in the, I'll say, 1920s. And I realized then that when I was looking at those other pictures of my non-Native friends, I was really wanting that. And I have that. I have those pictures of the old ones, of people who have those values, who fought for what they wanted.